Oh come on, really? Having a dream about waking up and feeling dizzy? I think my farmer needs to get out more. Harvest Moon: The Lost Valley is a farming simulation game released on the Nintendo 3DS in November 4th, 2014. The game will hopefully see a European release later this year, and surprisingly there's been no plans to bring it out in Japan. This game, interesting to note, is the first Harvest Moon game that wasn't developed by Marvelous AQL, instead being developed by Talbot Inc. However, since the publisher Natsume hold the Harvest Moon name, the game was released as a Harvest Moon game. In this installment, our farmer finds himself, or herself, you can pick your gender, lost in the mountains during a snowstorm. After finding shelter thanks to a mysterious voice, your farmer rescues a harvest sprite buried in the snow. From there you find out that all the seasons but winter have disappeared from the valley, and because you have nothing better to do anyways, it's your job to help the harvest goddess restore the 3 other seasons to the valley. So get out your farming tools, because we're going to start by digging up the good. I like the concept of growing crops in the Lost Valley. Unlike previous Harvest Moon games, you can freely modify the terrain in this game. The height of the terrain can affect how quickly crops grow and is very vital for you to access certain areas later on in the game. Soil quality also plays a big part on how your crops grow in the game, with certain crops favouring certain soil. As an added bonus, with elevation and soil quality, throw on the crop's preferred season, and you can also get crop mutations such as red cabbages and white strawberries for example, but that's all down to chance. The fact that crops can now be grown during any season is also a nice touch to the game, seeing as for the first year a majority of the game will be set in winter conditions. I like the personalities of the characters in the game. This has generally been one of the things I liked about the Harvest Moon series in general. Whether it's Salesman Sam, who means well but has somewhat shady speech habits, to Super Duper Emily, to Rich Catherine, or the eccentric Doc, I felt that the personalities of the characters really helps makes the game a little bit more interesting, even if they do recycle what they say most of the time. Materials in the game are very plentiful. You can easily make some quick cash in the game early by cutting down the trees in your area and selling the lumber to Sam. Once you get an upgraded axe and hammer, you can then cut down the hardwood trees and smash rocks and sell the materials produced by them for money. Once you start going into the mines and getting materials, from there is when the real money starts flowing in, and trust me, for the largest house upgrade, you're going to need a lot of money. Stamina in the game I've also found to be very generous in comparison to other Harvest Moon games. It was incredibly rare for my stamina to drop below half until fall when I was actively doing a lot more digging and rock smashing, but by that point I was stockpiling crops and produce so I could easily restore my stamina whenever it was running low. I also found that your well-being indicator was also quite generous despite the few times I've stayed in the valley past midnight, the only noticeable penalty I've seen being my farmer wake up an hour late. Now that we have the good out of the way, let's talk about the stuff I didn't like in the bad. I found the flow of time in the Lost Valley to be a little bit more fast-paced than in previous Harvest Moon games. While this does encourage the player to have better time management, I find it more of a hassle due to timed events throughout the day. For example, if I go and feed my animals, they'll stop eating and they'll allow me to get produce from them at the nearest hour. So if I feed my animals at 7:30 AM, chances are that they'll be ready at 8. If I put the feed in at let's say 7:50 AM and the animals don't reach the feed quick enough, I'd have to wait until 9 AM before I can extract produce. On top of that, I can let my animals go out to pasture, but I have to make sure that they're back in the barn before 6 PM. 1 minute too late and it looks like my animals are going to sleep outside tonight, and that's because the one harvest sprite that helps me look after the animals finishes work at 6 PM. This also applies to certain villages as well for certain festivals. For example, a lot of the villages require you to talk to them before 10 AM in order to enter the festival, but if you're 1 minute too late, well tough luck, you just miss out. Now while I said materials were plentiful in the good, gathering certain materials can be an absolute pain, especially for that large house upgrade I mentioned earlier. Materials are completely random from mining points, and if you want to quickly get the materials you want, you may have to save scum for it. For those unfamiliar with the term, it's saving and reloading the game until you get the outcome that you want. This can be very time consuming as well as frustrating, especially when farming for mithril or adamantite, especially since when farming for the latter you keep getting the former whenever you don't need it. The story of the game I also found to be a little bit on the short side. I was able to finish 90% of it and had the credits roll by the time winter rolled about. After the credits there is one more additional story segment, but for spoilers' sake I'll keep quiet on it. It does however require your character to be married and have a kid. But in comparison to other Harvest Moon games in which the game normally gives you 3 in-game years to complete, I found that I had little trouble restoring the 3 other seasons. But I suppose to be fair the story would have to be reasonably short, otherwise I would have gone mad having to deal with an eternal winter. There were also times where the camera frustrated me to no end, especially if I've made stairs to higher levels. In some cases the game likes to adapt a top-down view as I go down them. Add that to the winter setting where everything has snow on it and virtually looks the same, and you can see how it can get a little annoying and confusing. If you're like me and you're too lazy to make a path to certain underground mines or to the underworld and just dug straight down, you'll also see what I mean when you're leaving. Initially when I started playing the game, I'd thought that there were no festivals and felt very irked by the lack of a town and other people to communicate with. Thankfully, by playing the game a bit more, I found that while there was no town to visit, more people showed up that I could talk to and eventually festivals started happening. There's a lot more to this game than initially meets the eye, and a lot of people may dismiss the game without truly exploring what it has to offer. In short, the beauty of this game stands out when you decide to invest more time in it. Speaking of beauty, let's move on to the next section, shall we? The Ugly, where I discuss graphics. Graphics has been one of the few things I never paid a great deal of attention to with Harvest Moon. Character models look pretty fair, and crop mutations do look different when compared to their normal variations. Soil quality looks pretty obvious as well, so when you're tilling the ground it's obvious to know if the soil is good, average, dry or swampy. Ironically, despite being labelled as Harvest Moon 3D The Lost Valley, the only time 3D is available, at least from my playthrough of it, seems to only be at the title screen, which I thought was a little bit amusing. Harvest Moon The Lost Valley isn't exactly my favourite game in the series, and future games bearing that name have quite a legacy to live up to if they're going to dethrone the likes of Friends of Mineral Town or Harvest Moon GBC 3. The game does add in a bunch of new stuff, but I feel that it's missing a part of its identity. As I mentioned earlier, it's something I can't stress telling everybody. It's one of those games where you really do need to invest the hours in order for it to shine, and to get to the point where I did this review, I played about 50 hours into the game. If you enjoyed other Harvest Moon games, I think this game is worth a shot, but I probably wouldn't recommend it to anybody who's entering the series for the first time. I would probably give this game a missing turnip out of 10, mainly because the staple crop in Harvest Moon games, and generally the first crop I like to grow traditionally in a Harvest Moon game, is unfortunately missing. Feel free to correct me if they're there, and I'll upgrade the ranking to I thought the turnip was missing but thankfully it's there, but you need to work your ass off to get it out of 10. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review.